one of the biggest impacts that I've seen is, and this has been happening for like a decade. And when I hear about it now, that there's still companies that aren't doing this, the shift left thing, right? I'm like, oh my god, if I hear another conversation about shift left, I'm gonna punch somebody. But I'm like, oh my god, how are you not still doing this? Like, this has been over a decade that everybody's been talking about shift left, right? What is shift left for people who don't know is you need to bring the mindset of security all the way to the beginning of development and all of these other pieces.
Welcome to the Elephant in AppSec, the podcast to explore, challenge, and boldly face the AppSec elephants in the room. I'm Alexandra, your host, joined by my amazing co-host Tristan, a former security engineer and co-founder of Escape. Today, we're excited to have an amazing guest, Mel Reyes, joining us. Mel has navigated through 2 IPOs, 3 M&As, worked with several startups, Pepsi, Mercedes, and accumulated a bunch of patents along the way. With more than 30 years of experience in various leadership advising and coaching roles, he enjoys building and empowering security teams within organizations. He's heavily invested in the cybersecurity community and has built his own, the Fellowship of Digital Guardians. That's why we're extremely excited to talk with him today about investment and security training within our organizations. Tune in and discover whether it's necessary or overrated expense. So, hi Mel, we're excited to have you here today with us. It's been already some time since we know each other from the days at Get Round, and I think you have more than 20 years of experience in security and development behind your back. So,
30. Yeah, I know. I didn't want to date myself, but it's 30. Yes.
30. So it's been a long, long time. And so yeah, the time at Get Around you spent, it was a huge feat for you going, bringing company public. So a lot of new security measures to implement, and well, hence a lot of expense, I think, as well for the company. And so I think about if we talk about the security training expenses, it's always a little bit of debate, and some can argue that it's overrated investment. So in your 30 years of experience, have you ever questioned the cost effectiveness of security training and security programs within the companies in which you worked at?
It's a really interesting conversation, and the conversation. I talk to industry leaders like former CISO at Walmart, former CISO at some of the largest institutions, in private and in public conversations, and the hardest thing when it comes to security and cybersecurity is it's not the same as IT marketing or anything else. IT marketing, they have an OKR, they have a KPI, they have a number that they need to reach. So if we put in $1 million, we should see $5 million. If we put in $2 million, we should see $50 million. There's always a quid pro. There's always something there that you can see a relationship, right? Marketing, spend, advertising, all of these things. It's easy. IT. Well, if we invest $500,000 in infrastructure work, we could save XYZ transit time or blah, blah, blah. So you have a direct measure. When it comes to cybersecurity and training and all of the aspects around it, how do you measure zero incidents, right? There are no security incidents, right? Like, is that a measure, right? How do you measure the response times, right? There are measures, there are KPIs, there's things on response times to actual events and incidents. But when it comes to the training, how do you get to be the tightest, leanest, security minded team or company, right? You have to make an investment. I've heard various numbers, right, from small to mid-sized business to enterprise, that it should be anywhere from 2 to 8% of your revenue should be allocated. Now, I say it should be more. It should probably be about 10% of your revenue should be allocated towards the whole set of cybersecurity programs, right? That's the tools, the training, and everything else. Now, you look at companies, some companies that I know very close to my mind don't even have a security person,
Yeah.
right? And we may know within our circles some. So to me, it's like, okay, you don't even have a security person, but you have some tools, or maybe you have an external vendor that's working with you. One of the biggest impacts impacts that I've seen is, and this has been happening for like a decade. And when I hear about it now, that there's still companies that aren't doing this, the shift left thing, right? I'm like, oh my God, if I hear another conversation about shift left, I'm going to punch somebody. But I'm like, oh my God, how are you not still doing this? Like, this has been over a decade that everybody's been talking about shift left, right? What is shift left for people who don't know is you need to bring the mindset of security all the way to the beginning of development and all of these other pieces. So whether it's a marketing project, a business project, an actual application, SaaS, or anything that you're building, everybody has to be talking about that. Old school would have been we work on a project and then we pull in infosec and we pull in legal and we kind of rush things and we kind of take risk acceptance. Now the idea is we have so many different avenues and so many different like third party issues, dependencies and code and this that, and the other. You have to educate all the way to the left, even before that, to the product development side, right? From a product development side, you need to make sure you have a review of, is this PII? Is it PCI? Is it going to, so for me, the investment, and I've seen this like hands on, where you take like an OWASP or you take any of the top 10, you take any of those pieces or any training that you give to the developers. I'm not kidding you. I've seen developers with 20 years of experience. They're like, huh, didn't even know that that was an issue. I guess I'm going to have to go back to my code, right? So there is an absolute gap in being able to be productive and you supercharge that 100%, 120% to develop something, and then really kind of bringing it down. It's like maybe you only need to be at 95%, and maybe you kind of take a little bit of a pause and say maybe 90%. Take a little bit of a pause and say, is this the right library? Is it up to date? Is the code being scanned? Are we following best practices on architecture? Do we know where the data lives? All of these pieces, but people need to be trained for that. People need to understand that. People need to understand that they need to have in their mind, yes, I could code the living crap out of that. That's great, but guess what? Is it the best practice? Are third-party vendor management and library dependencies are the biggest issue in the last 5+ years, especially during COVID, especially during the fact that everything moved for the most part to the cloud. I am a huge advocate for making the right investments, and this is where I typically come in. Is people are like, well, why do we need $3 million for this program? It's like, well, let's look at what you're actually going to buy with that $3 million, right? And then there's times where I'm like, I agree, you don't need $3 million. You need two, but not in that section. You need it in this section. Or I'll say, well, actually, your company's so big and you have so much, you're so far behind that you actually don't need three. You need four, and you also need it in this section, right? So there's the ability to have 20, 30 years of experience in all of the different domains for cybersecurity gives folks like myself a very keen look into how to best spend the money, right? But at the end of the day, brass tacks, you need that baseline training. You need to confirm whether it's for any of the certifications, SOC, ISO, or anything else, following any of the frameworks, NIST, or other. You need to confirm that everybody has been leveled up to understand the importance, to understand the avenues, and to also stay up to date with the impact that they could have on security. I'm a huge advocate for this. I'll probably talk a little bit more about this, but there's a cultural change that has to happen, and that's the hardest part.
Yeah. And how would you actually implement this cultural change? Do you
Slowly,
yeah,
slowly, very slowly. So, yeah, the cultural change, I talked about ROI, I talked about effective measures, right? You can't get to that until there's an acceptance, right? The biggest challenge that I just had this conversation last night at dinner with a couple of security colleagues that I have, security leaders that are in the industry. I said that the problem isn't with defining the security. It's not with XYZ. It's with top-down acceptance, right? If you don't have that North Star guiding light vision to say we have to implement secure measures, and yes, we will make an investment to do that, and you're constantly, changing the cultural view. How do you do that? ROI, KPIs, OKRs, right? You have to define what is your target? So, in my last few roles, I set targets, right? We need to get at least 50% code scanning coverage by in 6 months, right? And we need to make sure that we're addressing at least 30% of the critical issues that come up, right? That's a target, that's a goal, that's an OKR, right? The more severe, obviously, the more you want to prioritize. But when it comes to the cultural change, um, it's hard, right? You've got a global landscape that is trying to drive things like GDPR changes that need to be made, or PCI compliance, pieces, or auditors that are coming in. You have to be able to use, whether it's the 90/10 or 80/20 rule, to say that's great. I love the fact that you want to drive $50 million of revenue with this new feature, but guess what? You could actually cost us $500 million in cybersecurity costs, because what you're coding is actually wide open, has issues, infrastructure isn't well. So that investment in making sure that someone top down is really pushing for, we need to pause, we need to pump the brakes, we need to actually make sure, is the first major cultural piece that you need to change. And I think I said this to you when we talked the last time. I was a developer from like the early 90s, right? And I would code through the end of the night. The sun would be coming up and I'd be coding. Was I checking for, secure code? I wasn't. But there were certain things that once I started to get into database, I was like, oh crap, I got to look at, SQL Server, SQL injections, and I got to make sure, right? So I learned a few things. Well, I know what I need to do as a developer back then and now. Well, I don't want to stop that momentum, right? I don't want you to stop in the middle of coding and be like, oh, I got to do a code scan, right? No, so I want to integrate it as part of the whole process. Well, guess what? If you've got a mindset where you don't have security at all, it's going to be a culture clash, because your build time may take another 3 seconds or 5 seconds. And guess what? I build 50 times a day, or maybe even 50 times an hour, right? So they're like, oh, you're making, So I love the fact that I was a developer, and I love managing development teams. One of my last gig, I had about 70 developers underneath my purview. But guess what? The mindset of developers now is, and I say this out and I'll say this publicly, is they're a bunch of divas, right? You're not touching my computer. I don't want you to build, slow my build. I don't want any more tools on here. You're not monitoring me. You're not this. You're not that. That has to change, right? That cultural component has to change. I don't care if you walk on water. If you're on my team and you're not willing to accept some of the measures or tools, you're out. You're out. I really do. Literally. I don't care if you're the subject matter expert on something. You have to be willing to work within some of the confines, and that is the cultural change. If it's top down and all management and all the teams and everybody else on the teams is willing to at least accept it, obviously there's always issues that come up. There's technical issues. There's alignment. You work through those, right? So it's not a hard mandate that you do it by Friday, unless you've already given the person 6 months. But the cultural understanding of, it's not about security, it's about safety, right? It's about the language we use when we're talking to developers, when we're talking to architects, when we're talking to all of the database folks and the data lake folks. It's not about security, it's about safety. You are making a product because you want to make money with stocks and you want the company to grow. And then you have clients, whether it's B2B, B2C, or otherwise, that need to grow as well. Well, guess what? If you're not doing your part to be secure, all of that could crumble, right? So we talk about, operations and safety. That's what, this really comes down to. It's a mindset of, am I putting an effort? I'm not saying 90% effort, security alone, an effort to understand and to accept the fact that we have to maybe slow down a little bit and actually do these kind of things. How do I prove that through OKRs? How do I prove that through ROI? Well, I will tell you, one of the biggest pieces that came out just before the pandemic, where I was talking about, well, guess what? All of these measures, all of these frameworks, all of these things that are out there, there's a ton of them. You find the right one, right? It could be HIPAA, it could be GDPR. Use that as part of your marketing, right? Use that as part of your pitch. Use that in your website, right? Use the badges and everything else. Why? Because just like it's been proven for decades in e-commerce. If you look at any of the studies in e-commerce where you're at the checkout flow and you see the 4 credit card badges that are on the bottom, like Visa, MasterCard, or otherwise, it's proven that it elevates the quality and the acceptance of that order, right? Because people recognize it and they trust it. Well, guess what would happen if we start to build out an arsenal of NIST, CIS, ISO, GDPR badges as part of your offering or as part of a site? Your level of confidence is, oh, okay, right, SOC 2, all of it, like, oh, okay, they seem to be doing some shit, right? I can't question them deeply on it right now, but if I do get engaged, guess what? Your MSAs, all of your other pieces, your security documents should prove that. So the heightened level, there's mandates now, government and nation state mandates that are telling folks they have to go through SOC 2, they have to go through these, through a lot of these programs, be at least NIST, CIS, or otherwise. If you're working with the government, screw that. In the United States, you got to do FedRAMP, you've got to do so many other things. So that level of importance, that level of it is an ROI, right? You are going to lose business if you don't have them. Sorry, I get on a rant and a half.
No, that was super interesting. It looks like I love the way you talk about it because this is very passionate and we can see the experience as well. we can feel the experience of 30 years in cybersecurity. And
Yes.
oh, by the way, I know that you have been like you said that you've been a developer before. It's very funny because this is my story as well. I started as a dev. And then I moved to cybersecurity, and I discovered there were many things that I did when I was younger that were very risky.
I don't want anybody scanning my old code. It would probably take me about a year to fix it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, but so this brings me to this question, right? Like, is cybersecurity, like, for instance, if we take the developers, like, they need to be involved because otherwise it's not gonna work. Like, the cybersecurity engineers, they can't control everything, even the scanners. Like, you can find everything, but is training really about making them cybersecurity professionals, or rather about awareness and like accepting the cybersecurity controls?
So there's different levels of training, right?
Yeah.
There's the generic training, OWASP training, and things like that. That to me is a baseline. When you look at cybersecurity controls, they talk about a basic base or baseline, right? What is the minimum that you need in order for you to say, you know what? I think they get it, right? Phishing exercises, OWASP training, being aware of access controls into buildings, right? Baseline things. You have to have that baseline, and that has to be ingrained in the culture, right? It can't just be, the people that go into the office need to know this shit, right? Once you get that baseline, then it becomes very specific, targeted on roles, right? If you're in the data team, guess what? You better have a whole lot more training and a whole lot more view into GDPR, PII, PCI, and all of the different aspects. Are you identifying configuration management, access controls? And it should be very regimented, right, on the access controls and everything else. Now, if you're a developer, you have to be educated a little bit more. If you're not in the OWASP, your local OWASP group or any of the other networking groups or any of the other knowledge transfer pieces like ISACA or ISC or anything else, then you're not learning of what you could be exposing your company to, right? You're also, if you're not following articles on third-party dependencies and SBOMs and everything else, you could be introducing Python 2.x crap into your environment. You could be introducing a library that's so old that it has 100 million CVEs. I give a presentation on CVEs, the vulnerability pieces that are cataloged, zero day and everything else. Well, the CVEs, the way I present it is I present it as a product roadmap. Right, back in the 90s and in 2000, it was there weren't a lot of CVEs, and that just continues to grow. But I don't present it as CVEs. I present it as a product roadmap, early stage, mid-career or kind of enterprise, and then nation state. Why? Because that's how the hackers think. Right, back in the day when I was around, a virus was a virus. Right, it either said something or closed something, or right now it's nation state attacks that we're looking at. right? So it has gone to an enterprise global level where if they find that you have one of those critical CVEs or vulnerabilities, oh, they're going to attack it to the nth degree, right? So
Yeah.
you have to stay aware of those. You have to get the right tools, systems, and people in place to say, out of the 1,000 CVE findings in my code, my environment, what's the most critical, right? And that's where the developers like, screw this, I'm not fixing 1,000 things. I'm like, you're right, you're not. We're going to fix five. Because out of the 10 that are critical, five are the ones that impact our systems the most because they have direct lineage into data, into our payment systems, or into something else, right? Our PII. So on one side, it's an acceptance on the cultural training to say, oh, I need to stay up to date with these kind of things. But then on the other side, it's on the leadership on the security side to say, I can't inundate you with 100 to 200 tickets of things that you need to fix. I need to help prioritize, and that's what you communicate up. That's what you communicate laterally, and that's what you communicate down, right? So the training. And I just posted an article on the 54 books that I read last year, right? People are like, "Mel, you're crazy." I'm like, "No, I'm not crazy. I'm hungry for knowledge." Right? I'm part of any and every cybersecurity networking group that is within 20 to 40 miles of my house. Why? Because every time I go there, I meet somebody where I learn something new, or the presenter presents something new. Whether it's a Black Hat, B-Sides, RSA, you have to get involved with your localized programs in order to do what you don't know. Right? AI, goddamn AI, like the last year and a half, like, holy crap, it's been killing everyone. Well, guess what? Yes, stay up to date with it. What do you need to know? What do you need to stay away from? Even the third party pieces, SBOM, all of these other things, those are critical. You have to stay up to date. The training is critical. If you, as a 20-year-old developer or a 30-year-old developer, aren't continuing to learn, guess what? You're going to get phased out, because you're not going to stay up to date with the latest languages. You're not going to stay up to date to know where to find those landmines. And guess what? You're going to get outpaced by somebody who is hungry, who wants to learn, and is going to be saying, whoa, 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 pump the brakes. Why are we using that library? We can't. We need to pull this in. We need, right? And that's the kind of stuff that you need as part of the team. And you need to empower the teams. And this is also part of what I look at all day long and it kills me that this doesn't happen, is you can't run a team at full throttle for product development or otherwise. You have to be able to kind of pull it back. And I have coding sessions. I have knowledge transfer sessions. I have competitions, right? So I break developers out into teams. I say, build the next new great feature you want. We've got 2 days. We're gonna a hackathon. We're gonna run it, and for 2 solid days, figure out who's sleeping during the day and who's sleeping at night, and just code a living crap out of something cool, right? It could be something that makes coffee, right? Or it could be that automates underwater basket weaving. I don't care, but let's do something cool. Then if you can tie it into the business, that's even better. But keeping them in tune, right? Use this new technology, create something new. Right, internally, and I said this last year in a couple of different conversations. If you're not bringing AI into your business, you're in 2 to 3 years, you're screwed. Right, you're literally screwed. Right, because it will automate a lot of things for you. It can help you do a lot of things. So, have a hackathon. Say, all right, none of you, we don't know what we want to build with AI. Guess what? I've got 20 developers. Build something with AI together. Right, you've got a week.
So I think I have a question based on it, because if we also take a little bit step back, because you said we have to have a baseline, for different teams. If we're not
Right.
talking about developers, because all other teams, for example, for me, working for marketing, sometimes also I have to use pieces of code, and I
Right.
had zero security training beforehand. So how do you define the baseline for all the teams, and especially with the AI, for using API that connects, ChatGPT with something? How
Right.
can, for example, I make sure that I'm using it, securely and don't compromise
Yeah.
anything?
Perfect example of a new technology and a new set of awareness training, right? You have to be able, like, number one, your company has to set a policy immediately. Number two, you might, depending on the size of your company, you might have to put in tight controls to block access until you figure out what the best approach is. And then number three, you want to enable people to be able to try to use these kind of tools. So you either bring something in house or you educate them on the criticality of don't put any of our data in any of these systems, right? Don't just take a big spreadsheet and be like copy paste. Hey, can you analyze this, right? Out in a public service. Why? Because it becomes part of the ethos and somebody else could use it. So that level of training on something new like that. Now let's take something that's old, phishing, right? You have awareness training for phishing, and then you have regular follow-ups where I would send out phishing emails, right? I will tell you, I had in one instance in one company I had sent the first phishing email after the training, after the AMAs, ask me anything. After all, I mean, this ran for 6 months. The prep, the baseline, the education. I got pushback from a very, 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 very senior leader, not the top, but very senior leader, who was in charge of a lot of critical operational things. First email I sent was a spoof site to log in to Google. Guess who entered their credentials? That senior leader, right? I didn't address it with them. I addressed it with my boss and said, by the way, you know that email chain and that communication chain that we had on other platforms where they were resisting all of this. Look, they put their credentials into a spoof site, right? So it's that kind of awareness and cultural change that needs to happen. That's why I say top down, right? It has to be a mandate, but the most important thing is it's all of the baseline pieces, right? And you have to be reminded of it, even if it's the same training year over year. It's a hard requirement if you're going public, for example. SOX here in the States are baseline things now that people need in order to go public. SOX for the most part, for financial reasons. But guess what? That training is also part of cybersecurity insurance. Right, so there's plenty of different platforms that offer great training, but if you don't have that baseline, a cross-functional baseline, right, it's something that marketing could look at, something that operations could look at, the developers could look at, but then there's going to be avenues outside of that are specific, like an AI piece is for everyone. Right, don't put anything in an LLM. Don't put any of our company documents or anything outside of our network. But that's why I say if you're not enabling it in house, right, to say, hey, you know what, we built this test area for you to be able to do things internally with our data. That's that you give them the playground, but that baseline is really about all those core domains. Right, developers, networking, all of the kind of the CISP domains, the certified security domains that people talk about, encryption, that's what you need to kind of elevate, folks. We have to just like in the last 20 years where we talked about RPA, robotic process automation, all these other things. We have to get everybody knowledged up on the importance of security. Right, security is not a want to have, is a have to have these days, right? And you have to be able to let people know this is part of your job. You can be you could be the janitor, you could be the CEO, or you could be anywhere in between. You have to understand the security controls. The janitor knows security controls, right? You've got to make sure all the doors are locked. You've got to make sure everything's clean. You make sure supplies are here, blah, blah, blah. CEO also needs to know that within their purview, they have to minimize the scope of potential risk to the systems that they access. They have to make sure to understand all of the different controls, like why is another tool getting installed? Well, guess what? It's really important for us to make sure we know if you're an enterprise or global CEO, guess what? We need to know where you are, because if you're in a company that has some adversity from customers or other companies or nation state threats, we need to make sure you're safe. Right. So I've been in companies where they know exactly where the CEO is. Right. There's either typically an entourage or they're digitally tagged. Why? It's really critical to know. right? Have they been taken, on a plane, and are they now in another country, right? So it's little things like that at the scope, scale, size that you have to look at.
Like, did it ever happen that
They
actually some?
didn't. No, no, yeah, no, it didn't. Yeah, they were saved. But if you get 1, 2, 5, 20, emails or letters threatening your company, right, because of something that that your company does, maybe it's financial, maybe it's this, maybe it's that, like, you have to be aware of the security implications there. So that means people who can hack into your building, who can hack into your network, who can hack into any of your employees' computers. Let's not talk about the massive chaos in the casinos last year, or any of the third-party vendor issues that have been happening. I won't call out names, but it's not just the top; it's everybody below, right? If you get somebody who's fatigued and hits accept on their authentication app in the middle of the night, you don't know what's going to happen.
You talk a lot about like top-down approach. It never occurred to you that bottom up, more that you had some actually developers who were pushing for
I
security?
love that. Those are my champions. Those are my champions. And that's why I enable the developers. I say, what tools do you want? I don't come in with a set of tools, right? Or a set. I have some ideas, and I can say, hey, here's 5 we can do here, 5 we can do here, 5 we can pick one, right? The folks who come in with the questions and come in with the tools and come in, I'm like, you need to promote that person, right? Because that's the mindset you need, right? Because the acceptance component from the bottom up, absolutely, absolutely.
But
Guess what?
we
You're not
we
going to
all
listen
know
to me, but you're going
we
to
we
listen
all
to your fellow developer.
we all know that those developers are gonna end up in security anyway. At some point, they leave their developer's job and they become security
You.
engineers. Yeah,
Thank you. They do, right? And, you
yeah.
look at an old school infrastructure architect, right? Guess what? They're probably, now they're a security engineer from a networking standpoint. You look at all the different roles. It's pivoting, right? Because you're doing same old shit, but guess what? Now you're security focused.
It was very interesting conversation, but like, what percentage actually of these people that you've seen, in your experience, uh, like, does it happen very often that there are this kind of developers that push for the security, or it's more, edge
The
case?
push. I think there's
Oh,
the
push,
push
push.
for, and then the push against, right? So I've had folks on my teams who have called things out, right? Like, what, hey, who inherited code, who found a code snippet, and try to integrate it, and they're like, oh no, wait, this isn't going to work because we might have to re-engineer our whole piece. I look for those gems. I look for those diamonds. The folks who are really, cognizant of the fact that you have to keep in mind all the security pieces. But what I find more is the flip side, is the resistance, right? You know, Developers who's been with the company 10 years, this is how we've always done it, right? How are you going to change our process? Developers who are fresh and new and hot, and they can walk on water because they can code stuff. They don't want to be disrupted. They don't want their mindset disrupted into accepting the fact that there may be things that you need to do. So I've seen them across the spectrum. All of them need the right leadership, the right education, the right ramp up. Right. In some instances, it could take 2 weeks. Right. Be like, oh, because they're accepting and they get it. Some instances, it could take a year to really build out a program that is as secure as what you need, right? But you have to start with the low hanging fruit, the things you can get done easily, the things you can communicate easily, and you have to have that management support. Without that, nothing works. And I talk about management support, and I said it right. It's a top down from a cultural standpoint, from a communication standpoint, and a financial standpoint, right? Without any of those three, like if you have two of them, you're still going to fail, right? Or it's going to take you longer, or there's going to be more resistance.
Yeah. And how can you actually? I think my question is: can you see already from the outside, externally, if the company follows some kind of security training or has the
Oh
security
yeah.
practices in
Oh yeah,
place?
there's some great services that are out there. I won't drop names that
Mm.
kind of give you where companies are now adding. There's a couple of companies now that are adding their attestments and their audit findings and everything else, so that they can communicate to other companies, because the third party vendor risk management is a huge, massive issue, right? So when you're looking at pulling in vendors, pulling in tools, so that's one big measure that's been happening. The other big measure is when you are kind of privatized or otherwise, being able to share SBOMs and kind of what your software bill of materials are, to be able to say what are the tools that you're using to build your pieces. So that's usually more of an NDA kind of when you're doing a B2B kind of scenario. And then the kind of public facing pieces are sharing the compliance frameworks that you're following, right? And then kind of when prompted, giving the summary audit assessments, right? So a SOC 2 type 2 or anything else, all of those are really, really critical to being able to understand what you can do, and how you can showcase it.
Okay, very interesting. And I think from the part of like looking it up, yeah, as you mentioned, like education is super important, and that's the question we always ask, everyone at the end of the episode. And I think you actually have a special like point for you. You take it very close to heart because you've just your fellowship, I think, of Digital Guardians. So how do you think? What platforms can you recommend? For people to support continuous security learning, if within their companies. And actually, you're a big book fan, so a book fan. If you recommend any books, that would be great as well.
So, it's interesting. There's like I mentioned, the kind of national or international groups like ISACA, ISC, OWASP, and others. You have to get into those, right? You have to get into the conference circuits that are localized to you, right? Black Hat, B-Sides, and a lot of the ones that run regular meetings and have a lot of different speakers. There's a ton of great podcasts that are out there on cybersecurity to kind of learn some of the pieces. When it comes to learning, it could be about different languages. It could be, Google, Microsoft, they have their own certifications. You've got ISACA that has certifications, ISC, EC Console, and a ton of them. The hardest thing about those is, and the reason why I created the Fellowship of Digital Guardians was, number one, you need actual training courses. Number two, you need a community that's open to being able to help people who just don't know. Number three, you actually need hands-on training on some of the cybersecurity things, right? So you need access to the tools. You also need that constant refresher, right? Somebody that can give you information, somebody that can go through that. So when you're pulling these together, affordable training where it's not a $10,000 or $20,000 boot camp, and then you're left on your own. You build a community that can actually connect you with other communities. It could be nonprofits, it could be the actual, ones where you're getting the certifications, but you've got to target a certification, right? It could be Secure Plus, Pen Test Plus, Certified Ethical Hacker. You've got to target what you want to kind of go into with the experience you have. So all of them are fantastic, and all of them are out there, right? There's some baseline cybersecurity ones that are out there, like the cybersecurity certification from ISC. So there's some that you can actually just start to take to get an understanding and kind of broaden your scope. Books are hard. Books are hard on the cybersecurity side because there's so many of them, right?
There is
and there's,
many of them.
There's so many, and there's so many different angles, and so it has to be kind of a focused look at the topic of the book, right? So it could be networking, it could be infrastructure, it could be development, it could be data. Then you have to find the best of the best of the books that are out there. Podcasts all day long, right? Because I'm not a big podcast guy. I do listen to audiobooks. I'm a physical reader kind of guy, but podcasts do give you a ton of information. Webinars, vendor webinars. Right. I'm like, well, why would you show up to vendor webinar? Well, I want to know what the vendors are doing. What are the new features? Who's the guest that they have on that's a subject matter expert that's you walking me through what they're doing. So all of these, and I tell folks this for their career development or otherwise, if you're not spending at least 1 hour a week, sometimes a day, learning or advancing something that you want to learn, then you're never going to get out of where you currently are. So I do a lot of coaching to help people through that. I'm like, so again, think about it. You work 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours a day. You're exhausted. You got family. You got to commute. You got this and that, the other. What do? You get home, you eat, and you put on Netflix, Hulu, something, right? And you watch 3 shows back to back. Now, let's say that's an hour and a half to 3 hours. If you just took one of those half hours or one of those hours and you picked up a book, you did a little research, you got into a community, you got into seeing which webinars are out there every day, right? You slowly start to increment. That's a fraction of a percent, right? But then every day as you combine it, you're going to start to learn more, get exposed more. You need to get out to all of the different groups and networking. It's a process. It's an investment that as a developer or a data person or anything up and down the line you have to make. But if you make that commitment, I guarantee you within a year, I read 54 books. About 10 of them were audiobooks because I do a lot of commuting. I live here in Los Angeles, so there's always traffic, right? So 10 of them were audiobooks. But how did I do it? I had to make the time. Either get up early on weekends, go to sleep, reading a book, right? And that's what we all need to do in order to learn and advance our careers and advance what we want to know. That's it. That's the story. Sticking to it.
And so the last question, what's your target for 2024 in terms of books?
I pulled it back. I was good, and I was just looking at the list because somebody recommended a book. So I pulled it for down to 26. So I'm going to try to read. I'm going to try to pull it back. Not the target in 2020 was 52. I read 52. I took a couple of years where I slacked off, so I only did about 15 or so. And then last year the target was 52. I read 54. And honestly, some of the books that I read were just phenomenal. I really, and even towards the end of 2022, tied into a lot of the kind of vision and the path that I wanted to go in. A lot of books that I read also validated some of the things, right? So it's not always about learning. It's always about, oh, that's why I do that, right? Or that's why, from a leadership standpoint, that works. Right, I didn't know why, but now I have a name to it, right? And most of mine are either leadership, team development, or otherwise. But I've got about 2 or 3. One of the best books that I read, which I wish I was in an office, because it would honestly, if you would have seen this book on my desk, you would have probably been very scared of me. But it's a fiction book. And it's called Murder Your Employer.
Okay.
Right, and it's
in your office.
I wanted it in my office, right? That's where I wanted to be, in an office, so I could just prop it up, right? But it's a great fiction book, right? So always kind of let your mind and your imagination grow. One of the books I'm reading now talks about that, right? Talks about the benefit of letting your mind kind of think through, because if you're dealing with a lot of things and pressures, that avenue into imagination and kind of thinking actually is instrumental in helping you with technical or anything else that you're doing. So I'll pick up 2 or 3 fiction books every now and then. That one just happened to be one that I kind of enjoyed, and I may buy the book if I ever do end up going back into an office. I may buy the book just to drop it on my desk.
To read it during lunch, or?
I'm sorry, I have the book. I will drop it on my desk.
Okay. Well, you're very big book fan. I have some here behind as well. Didn't read all of them.
Yeah.
Still, in the process. But I'm a bit obsessed about buying books as well.
So I'm almost done. I'm almost done with this one. Wisdom of the Psychopaths. And it's what saints, spies, and serial killers can teach us about success.
So you read murder theme.
Are all of them as frightening as that, or?
No, they're not.
It's always frightening
this
titles.
Actually really good. No, I have the CEO Next Door, The Secret, right? There's a lot, but this one of the things that I look for. So I do executive coaching, and I do a lot of other pieces. One of the things that I look for is behavioral analysis, right? So books like Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss talks about the techniques you can use to kind of draw things out of people, right? Almost like a therapist, but really he was a hostage negotiator.
Yeah.
This book is where I wanted to understand, just like there was another book that I read, and honestly, I don't pick these titles. I'm just saying, I look at the ratings, I look at the recommendations, but last year I may or may not have read Surrounded by Idiots, right? It is actually a great book that gives you a framework with 4 different categories of how to kind of put people into generalized buckets if you wanted to, so you can know the character traits of how to work with them or deal with them, right? Great book, right? And it's that kind of book like this one, Wisdom of the Psychopaths, that helps me understand, gives me a framework. Like there's about 8 different categories to if you level high up on these 8 categories, or 8 or 10, you're probably a psychopath, right? But believe it or not, there are the top few jobs that are out there where these levels are high: a CEO, doctor, right? So
Yeah.
that doesn't mean they're psychopaths. That means that they have elevated levels of, whether it's PCR or PLL or a few of the other things that they talk about. And I have to get the terminology right, but everyone is on that psychopath spectrum. It's just a question of whether or not you have uninhibited emotional pieces that you just don't care, or otherwise. So there's certain factors that kind of push you over the edge. So it's actually a great understanding of how to look at cross-functional teams you inherited, all the, and then the behavioral components around, oh, they're strong in this sense, and they're, and I can tell that I may need to kind of pull it back. Where on another side, I'm like, oh, okay, I can see that they need a little bit more of a push on this sense, so I need to kind of get them elevated to educate them on, by the way, if you want to succeed or you need to kind of push yourself here because I see the talent. And that's one of the things that, 30 years of working across multiple contracts and everything else, I've gotten to meet a lot of people, and I've gotten to be able to kind of see where folks are diamonds in the rough, and when folks are like are really vanity, right? They don't really know what they're talking about, but they can show off like anything. So when I and the titles actually do pull me in. This one I picked up at the bookstore, The Wisdom of Psychopaths. I'm like, how do I not want to learn? Literally, it's what saints, spies, and serial killers can tell us about success. I'm like, I'll learn from anyone, right?
No matter the background. Yeah. So it was very fun. Thanks a lot, Mel. Thanks a lot for your
you.
time and
Thank
your
you for being you were like plenty of energy and passion when you talk about the cybersecurity topics. So I love it. It was a very enjoyable experience to have you as a guest.
Cybersecurity is boring as shit. Let's be real here, right? Nobody wants to talk about frameworks. Nobody
It
wants to
depends
talk about
on which side you
controls.
are.
like I was talking to someone yesterday about GRC during dinner.
Yeah.
That was a whole hot 2 minutes, and I was like, all right, we need to talk about something else. Right?
Yeah,
Because,
of course.
So I thank you. I appreciate you, and I'm looking forward to our continued work.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Ray.